So as you teased, Musso, the New Orleans Saints got some good news yesterday, and the injury report comes out later this afternoon. We'll learn a little bit more about the specifics, but we know that Will Lutz was designated to return from IR on Monday, the Saints kicker. Mike Thomas still looks to be a few weeks away from playing. Looks like he definitely will not play this Sunday against Seattle. But yesterday, the Saints designated Quan Alexander, Marcus Davenport, and Quan Smith all to return from injured reserve. And what that means, similar to Will Lutz, who we talked about yesterday, is that none of them are guaranteed to play in the Saints' Week 7 game against the Seahawks. By designated them to return, it opens up this 3-week window where the Saints need to activate them to the active roster or shelf them for the rest of the season to put them back on IR. And obviously, these are all key guys, Musso. Technically, they're all starters: Quan Alexander, Quan Smith, and Marcus Davenport. And the answer might be obvious. I think I know what you're going to say. But out of those three guys, who do you think the Saints need back the most?
So I think it's the defensive guys. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I say the defensive guys because that's just, honestly, that's how the Saints have been winning games for the past 3 or 4 years. And those two defensive guys in particular, Quan Alexander and Marcus Davenport, I think are extremely important. Quan, for the obvious reasons, right? What he gives you at linebacker opposite Demario Davis, the relationship they have, you put him on the field, he instantly makes your defense better. You saw that when the Saints traded for him. You saw that when they re-signed him. I mean, it was, okay, you're healthy, go. Get out there because you're the best option we have. And you see it not only just straight up in linebacker play, but in coverage. Like he adds something. And it's not to say that Pete Werner hadn't played well, because I think he's actually played very, very well. But Quan's just that step up. And then Marcus Davenport, the role he plays is opposite Cam Jordan. And Davenport had a really, really good preseason and honestly was having a good start to the regular season before getting hurt. He ended up finally getting home to the quarterback. And if you have him, and then also throw David Onyemata in there too, you bring him back as well. How much pressure does that take off of Cam Jordan and possibly allow him to pick his production back up? Because that's once again been a very large talking point, very focused on talking point, is the lack of production from Cam Jordan so far at his defensive end spot and for the second year in a row. So I'm most interested in getting the defensive guys back. Quan, of course, it's another weapon, hopefully, in the passing game. But the Saints, at least until maybe a little bit later on in the season, are still going to look to win the game on defense and with their running game. So give me Quan Alexander just because of his importance to the defense, and it immediately elevates the group. And give me Marcus Davenport, and I'll even throw David Onyemata in there when he comes back from a suspension, as guys on that defensive line who can help the Saints pass rush and hopefully take some of the pressure and get Cam Jordan back to producing.
David Onyemata, a.k.a. the Manitoba Mauler, eligible to return after this game against the Seahawks when he serves his 6-game suspension. And before I get to the D-line, just a thought on Quan. We've talked about Quan so much since the beginning of the season. He was going to be so important for this team. And I remember being surprised back in August 6th. He said he is 100% because he tore his Achilles not too long before that. I believe it was around Christmas time when he tore that Achilles.
It was Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve. There you go. So that's obviously much less than a year. That's only 8 months. And I was a little worried, but he looked really good in that first game against the Packers. He goes for 34 snaps. He didn't record too many stats technically, but he was really good in coverage, which is why he's so important to the Saints defense. But then apparently he got injured in that game. He doesn't practice the next week, and then he goes on IR. And what you said about him and Werner is really interesting because we know how good the Saints defense has been, this particular group with Quan Alexander. But Pete Werner has played really well. He had 13 tackles last week against the Washington football team. And not only that, but he is somebody who you drafted in the second round, who you invested heavily in, and who you're going to need going down the road. And Quan, as good as he's been, man, he does not stay on the field, not just this season, not last year, but since the start of his NFL career. So Quan Alexander is definitely going to have a role in this team, but I'm not sure how many snaps he takes away from Pete Werner, and I'm not sure if he starts right off the bat.
See, I think if he's healthy, I think they're going to throw him back out there. I mean, I think that's just because he immediately makes you better, and you saw it with him coming off the Achilles. I mean, we had that conversation plenty about would they do it or would they be a ramp up, and he was out there from the jump. So maybe there's still a ramp up period, but if Quan's healthy and back and ready to go, I think he's going to be your starter.
We will find out on Sunday. People seem to be split on that, but Pete Werner has played really well. But as Musso's saying, the Saints defense has just been on another level with Quan Alexander in there. And you can say the same thing about Marcus Davenport, Musso, in that first game. He played really well. And a lot of times with Davenport, obviously he's somebody else who has been injury prone, hasn't always been on the field, but he's somebody who a lot of times shines in preseason or shines in training camp, but it doesn't necessarily carry over to the games. At least not as far as consistency is concerned, but he carried over that momentum in that first game against the Packers, and Marcus Davenport looked really good. From the first offensive drive for Green Bay, he had the first TFL of the season for the Saints. He sacks Aaron Rodgers on a bootleg later in that first quarter, I should say, and he was harassing Aaron Rodgers all throughout the game. Now, as we've talked about on this show, the Saints secondary deserves a lot of credit for what they're doing with the lack of a pass rush. As you said, Cam Jordan's still looking for his very first one, and we talked about guys not stepping up in the absence of Trey Hendrickson. And if Trey Hendrickson's stats are any indicator or any further indicator, they really miss him because he is playing just as well, if not better, than he was last season. Through 6 games, 5.5 sacks for Cincinnati, 12 tackles, 11 QB hits. So he's on track to reach, if not surpass, his numbers. So they've definitely missed Trey Hendrickson. Up to this point, the secondary has played well enough for the defense to still be a good group, but Marcus Davenport can make a huge difference, along with David Onyemata for Dennis Allen's group.
Yeah, the Trey Hendricks thing's interesting, right? That was the whole question mark around that. It was somebody's going to pay him the elite pass rusher money after that, but are the Saints convinced after just 1 year? Was he turning a corner, or was it just that 1 year? Right now, it certainly looks like he has turned the corner.
Tano Passigno is leading the Saints with 2 sacks on the team. Like I said, they're still the third best, scoring defense in the NFL. So Davenport coming back is going to be huge. And Will Lutz, Mike Thomas, potentially Quan Alexander, all going to be huge. But before we go to break, did want to touch on Tre'Quan Smith's potential return for the Saints. He's somebody else who has had kind of a really weird journey up to this point. Lee's practice back in August during training camp, came back to practice for 1 day before that first game against the Packers. Thought that he was going to play. There was a lot of optimism, but the very next day, he was out of practice. Then he goes on IR later in September on September 10th. And I think Tre'Quan Smith is going to help, but I just want to take this opportunity to say that I do not appreciate all the kind of disrespect I've seen for Marquez Callaway, because Marquez Callaway isn't somebody who's going to be a superstar. We've talked about it in a fantasy football setting, but he's been huge for this team, and he's going to continue to be huge for this team when Tre'Quan Smith gets back, and we'll see who game by game has more stats. But if you're asking me my opinion, there's nothing that really Tre'Quan Smith has done up to this point in his NFL career to show me he's a better receiver than Marquez Callaway.
I completely agree. I think you know what you're going to get from Tre'Quan Smith, and we've seen it, and until I kind of see him out there on the field, I don't really know if I believe he's going to play. So just because of what you said, you come back to the Packers week, and then 1 day at practice, and there he's not out there anymore, and you didn't see him at all in the preseason. So what is he really going to bring? I think you've got a large enough sample size with Tre'Quan Smith in his time with the Saints to know that, and it's not much.